Welcome Booktube viewers. Those of you who are familiar with my channel know that I tend to the literary fiction end of the book spectrum rather than the sort of mass market commercial end. So what I'm going to go on and say in this video is probably quite shocking in the light of that. Duh, duh, duh. And so it may not come as a surprise to you that I don't read fan fiction. No, that's not the shocking revelation. And the reason I don't read fan fiction is not because of any prejudice, but just I'm completely unfamiliar with most of the characters that they write about. I've never watched Game of Thrones, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Twilight. I'm obviously familiar with Star Trek, but I was never a Trekkie, so I'm not overly, forensic knowledge of episode by episode. I've certainly never seen, I only ever saw the original series. I've never seen The Next Generation and whatever came after that. I have never seen any prequels, sequels, wequels, mequels, or any other Kel Surprise ways of making money that the Star Wars franchise is. I've only ever seen the original three. So I just, I don't have that frame of reference, so fan fiction wouldn't really make much sense to me. But here's the statement, the shocker. All fiction, literary fiction included, is a form of fan fiction. There, I've said it. So what do I mean by that? I can't believe there are many writers who write not having been inspired or prompted by reading the works of others that have come before them. Yes, we're all taught to read and write at school, but I can't believe there's a jump from that sort of, grounding the basic skills into, at some stage in the future, leaping to starting to write your own books without ever having read anything before that's come before it. And even if you don't directly honour the people who influence you, they still influence you. You just might not be aware of it. And this is quite an interesting thing, because in the music industry, musicians are very open in acknowledging their musical influences. And I've read in the past many an interview with a musician in his house, where he's basically gone and got his record collection and he's sort of thumbing through them with the interviewer and they talk about the records. It's completely the opposite in literature, where writers seem very unwilling to reveal their influences. Now, part of that may come from, in certain literary books, a lot of it is sort of playing literary games by sort of planting quotes or references, oblique references that, it's part of what the reader has to do is try and work out where these come from. So I could understand that sort of strain of it, but it's not just that. It's just writers seem to be much more sort of the mystery of their art and not revealing their sources. So that's the first thing. Myself, I'm very open about acknowledging when particular stories or writers have influenced me. In a couple of my flash fiction collections, I actually put in the back for each story what the source of inspiration for the story was. Now, they're not all from other books and writers. Some of them are just things I've observed in everyday life. But where it has directly come from something I've read, I acknowledge that. And off the top of my head, in two of my later collections, where I haven't specifically listed the sources of the stories, but I know I wrote one story directly in response to China Miéville's novella, The Last Days of the New Paris, and several stories I've written in response to the works of Ben Marcus. I've written an unyet published short story based on Franz Kafka's writing of wounds in various of his short stories. So I don't mind being open about my sources. But just to return to the theme, so as I say, I don't believe there's a single author of serious literature writing who has not been influenced in some way by the books that have come before him or her. And the question is, as I say, whether they choose to acknowledge that openly or not. There's a brilliant trilogy by David Markson, who wrote This Is Not a Novel, Vanishing Point, and The Last Novel, which consists purely of epigrams and quotes about writers, artists, poets, painters, scientists, politicians, statesmen, anyone who's ever made an impact on the world scene. And virtually 95% of these books are constructed of these. And what Markson's doing there is he is saying, I am an author and I have read all of these things in my reading life. and now I'm making a book out of it. So he is totally acknowledging his debt to all these people that have preceded him. And he's also saying, in the few interludes that an author character has in these books, that he is a dwarf standing on the shoulders of these giants. You know, what has come before inevitably shapes what he writes now. And I think that's a very good sort of summary of my position, that I don't care how literary an author you are, you have been influenced by what has come before. So, you know, the novel wasn't really established till the late 17th, early 18th century. Then you have, you know, the classic canon. You know, what are you taught at school? What books do you study at school? They're going to come from the classic canon. And then, you know, then you had modernism, and then you've had postmodernism. So if you're influenced in any way by these things, it's going to creep into your work. We are truly dwarves standing on the shoulders of giants. It's very hard, you know, when so much has been done already in literature, and any art form, but in literature that I'm talking about, to genuinely break new ground. Somebody probably got there before you, whether you're aware of it or not. So all fiction is fan fiction. Yes, it's not fan fiction in the sense that we are taking characters from pre-existing books, although there are writers who do that. Jasper Fjord does that. If you think about how many of the Greek classic tragedy plots have been rewritten and reworked by authors into, you know, modern novels. So we do that as well. But there, you know, you can't help but acknowledge your culling of work from somebody else. But as I say, so it may not be a direct sort of plagiarism or borrowing of characters, but it is still fundamentally, acknowledged or not, a recognition of the work that has come before by others. And that is why I say there's no room for snobbery about fan fiction, that all fiction, whether you care to acknowledge it or not, is fan fiction. There, I said it. Okay, feel free to discuss and to take it to pieces in the comments box below. Thanks very much. Till next time.